I used to be happy here. Limbo is up next on Rediscovered Movies. Hello, welcome to the season 3 finale of Rediscovered Movies. I'm your host, Nomfanelo Malloy. So before I get started, I want to do some quick housekeeping. So after this episode will be the season 3 after show, which will be available in audio format only on the podcast platforms for those of you that are watching this on YouTube. And also to please submit questions or comments on anything like with the season of the podcast, either through email or through a short voice message on Spotify for podcasters. I'll go through this towards the end of the show. So, I'm really excited to talk about this movie as the 50th, not just the season 3 finale, but it's the 50th episode of the podcast. So, I will be talking about the movie Limbo. So, before I get started, I want to share this quick note. So, while I was working on the podcast, this was during the first season back in 2021. I had like a different list of names to name this podcast. And I couldn't figure out which one because they were good in their own ways. So I decided to watch the movie Limbo, which I'll be talking about with this episode. And then while watching this movie, I decided, you know what, I'm gonna name the podcast Rediscovered Movies. So here we are, everything coming into full circle here. So that's why, like, for me, I wanted to cover Limbo for. I've always wanted to cover it for the podcast, but I decided I'm going to do it for the 50th episode of the podcast. So let's get on to the film of the episode, Limbo. So, Limbo, it is a 2020 British comedy drama film. It is written and directed by Ben Sharrock, who's known for directing Pikadero and Patata Tortilla. The film stars Amir El-Masry, Vikash Bhai, and Orebiyi. Apologies if I mispronounce any of the names. So, the film focuses on Omar. He's a promising young musician. Separated from his Syrian family, he is stuck on a remote Scottish island awaiting the fate of his asylum request. So the film premiered virtually at the Toronto Film Festival in September 2020. It was released in theaters on April 30th, 2021. So in terms of box office, it made around $758, $758,000, 851. I can't even speak today. Let's go this again. So it made $758,851 worldwide. So essentially, most of that was international, and the other half of it was domestic. So domestically, it opened number 18 with $84,710. It was beaten by films including Demon Slayer, Mortal Kombat, and Godzilla vs. Kong. In terms of critical reception on Metacritic, it has a 83 critic score and a 6.8 user score. It won 3 Cairo International Film Awards, including Best Film. It was nominated for 2 BAFTA Awards, including Outstanding British Film. At the time of this recording, it is available on demand, so check your local provider. Let's get into first discoveries. So, I attended TIFF virtually 2020 that year, and I believe I saw Limbo. I didn't actually see the movie virtually, but I saw like it was under the list of films that appeared at TIFF. I decided not to check it out at the time because I think there was no trailers for it, and and usually like when there's a movie coming out, usually during the festival, I am skeptical at times when there's no trailers for it. Like sometimes I'll go with my gut and check out movies that don't have trailers, either because of the filmmakers or the cast involved, or it has an interesting premise. So usually a combo of those ones. So year later, the 2021. So I was playing the Time Play game. So for those of you not familiar with Time Play, so Cineplex used to have these halftime shows before the movie starts, where with time play essentially you would play like along with your app, essentially answer these like movie quiz type questions. So they did a virtual edition during the pandemic with time play. So while like I guess those games were happening, they showed a trailer for this movie Limbo. And when I saw, I'm like, oh, that looks cool. Like, it definitely has some like Wes Anderson vibes to it, at least of the aesthetics that I known of Wes Anderson. Because it's embarrassing to say this, but I have not seen any Wes Anderson movies in full. Because I've seen bits here and there, either through commercials, trailers, or whatever. But I do want to eventually start watching his filmography and all that stuff. So it seemed like the movie was going for that quirky vibe because it included like the narration and it had the deadpan humor featured in the trailer. So that piqued my interest for sure. And by the time it was released in theaters, I was just disappointed that it was not released in a theater that was close to my area, which was terrible. So I had to end up waiting for it to come out on demand. So I eventually rented it months later on YouTube. And I really enjoyed the movie because it was not quite what I expected based off the trailers, but I really enjoyed like the use of the humor and also too with the dramatic elements given the film's subject matter revolving around immigration and refugee status and all that stuff. And I felt like the tone was a bit unexpected towards like the later half of the movie. And I seem to enjoy the movie more like on rewatch um, because of the with the things that I just mentioned. And I do want to note that yeah, everyone did a great job with the movie. The cinematography was nice with the 4:3 format because I see at times with 4:3 format, like some people will use it either as a gimmick or as a stylistic choice. But I like here that with that format, it really fits in terms like of the themes of the movie, with the characters being stuck in limbo. So that really utilized the film, in my opinion. And yeah, it's just a fantastic movie. So let's get into the highlights. So I enjoyed that the humor aspects of the movie was comforting because yeah, when we're dealing with serious subject matter, it's just nice to have that balance because as they say, laughter is the best medicine. So essentially, they used a lot of deadpan humor by essentially showing yeah non-reactions, I suppose, from the characters, a lot of monotone vibes. So the opening scene, for example, is a notable example for this type of humor when we see Helga and Boris dancing awkwardly during a cultural awareness 101 class, which is funny and is also funny too. We see there's a high level awkwardness when you also add in the reactions from the class. They're all just like staring, I suppose. And I thought, yeah, that was hilarious with that scene. But there's examples of this type of humor throughout the movie, and I enjoyed that with the movie. There's a lot of, you could say, static or still camera shots. So essentially an example. So, with if you guys familiar with the Torn music video by Natalie Imbruglia, essentially that one shows like just one shot, like in the living room where all like the characters essentially moving within that frame. So essentially, that's how it's like for this movie for the most part. Because the only really time you'll see the camera move is if they do like a few like pan shots from either left to right or vice versa, or like there's like they'll do like a tracking shot during the grocery scene for this movie as example. And we see, yeah, there's a mix of close-ups or like wide shots, but it's always in the 4:3 format with the static shot. So I thought that was nice to see. And I enjoyed Omar's character arc. That's the main character in this movie. So we see him throughout the movie. He's wearing that blue puffy jacket. He carries this oud, what? If I'm saying that right. Essentially looks like a pear shaped kind of a small guitar. I think a lute is the close resemblance for this instrument, if you guys are familiar with that. So essentially he carries that around, which apparently his grandfather owned that instrument and I guess was a musician. And so essentially with him, with Omar, he left Syria, I believe, because of the war that's happening, and is trying to seek asylum in Scotland. And essentially, since he left Syria, because he left his family behind, essentially he has not played the instrument. But we do see cell phone footage of him, I guess, playing the instrument during a concert where his family was in attendance. And we see throughout the movie, he has these conversations with his family, like on a payphone, which I can't believe payphones exist in Scotland, if that is still true. Um, and we see like he has doubts about playing the music, probably because it reminds him of home and he feels very isolated in a place, a country where he barely knows anyone, well, apart from his roommates, of course. But yeah, Omar is quite the intriguing character for this movie. And there's a moment where we see him, I guess, interacting with his brother Nabil, even though Nabil's whereabouts is unknown because he's deciding to, I guess, participate in the war that's happening in Syria. So with that scene of them in the cottage, I guess, is quite heartwarming, even though we know that like with the brothers not actually is more like a hallucination. But at least like with that moment it gives Omar like the confidence, to move on by like resuming his musician is. So with his roommates, so they're quite adorable with the roommates. So we have Farhad. So he essentially throughout this movie is trying to help Omar out as his agent slash manager. So he just claims that on the spot. And it is quite sad to see Omar sort of rejecting Farhad's help because, he's going through a lot emotionally. So, in a way, Farhad is the movie's comedic relief because we see him, for example, he will covers his mouth like this and change his reactions kind of slightly or sad or serious. So yeah, he's quite hilarious. And also too, he has this thing where he really likes his particular chicken. So he decides to steal that chicken from this little hen house and names it Freddie after Freddie Mercury, which is hilarious. And that scene when Omar wakes up to Freddy on top of him in this like shoe closet type bedroom was hilarious. Like I would probably react the same way too, maybe even more hysterical for me if I were Omar. But yeah, that was quite hilarious and it was quite bittersweet for Farhad essentially to bring Freddie back to the hen house. Well, he would have had to eventually. So he decided to do that after he got the letter where he his approval for asylum was noted. So he got approval for his asylum. And the other roommates, Abdul and Wasif, so they have a special bond in a way. Like they kind of had like a sibling, I guess, dynamic, even though they're not related. So I think Abdul mentions that they met during, I would say, unusual circumstances because I believe Abdul was stuck in the burning building, and then Owasif essentially rescued him. And it was interesting that during that moment, they sort of made fun of each other during the exercise when Abdul is trying to recreate like an interview, I guess, over the phone. So essentially, like Wasif, like tells Abdul, "Oh, you're never gonna get the job as a cleaner," and then Abdul's like, "Oh, you'll never do well as a football player, so you'll be a soccer player for those of you in North America." So, and it's quite heartbreaking with their arcs at the end, essentially, because Abdul gets deported and Wasif he runs away when that happens, but eventually, like we learn that he passed away, I guess, when Omar discovers his body during a snowstorm. So yeah, I thought the roommates overall were cool, and they have their nice dynamics, particularly when they're watching Friends on TV. So in terms of like scenes and moments, so as I just mentioned, when the police arrive to deport Abdul and Wasif, because we see there's like this tense music when the police show up at the door, and then the end result essentially with Abdul getting deported and Wasif running away. So I thought, that was a very interesting dynamic scene. Also, too, when Omar and Farhad have their argument, we see both of them are standing on opposite ends or opposite sides, sorry, of a glass door. And Omar, like, of course, is going through a lot, like, because, with issues with his family, with just discovering Wasif in a snowstorm, and his lack of motivation to play the Owad. And there was an interesting note that Farhad essentially said that he would not have been accepted in Afghanistan. So I wondered like what that meant. So I'm just wondering maybe like he's gay. Because since he does name the chicken Freddie after Freddie Mercury. Freddie Mercury, of course, was a gay icon and all that stuff. So I'm just wondering, is it because of that or is it something else? I mean, it didn't bother me like either way, but I just would have loved to know what Farhad was meaning when he mentioned that to Omar. And another scene when Omar goes to the grocery store. So the first time he goes, he's trying to look for the Somax spice, but the cashier says, "Yeah, we don't have any. It's just what ketchup and mustard." And the way like those scenes are shot is also brilliant too. And the second time, we see the shot of the single package of the sumac sauce, or spice, sorry, which is nice. So that was fun too, especially with their banter back and forth for both scenes was cool. And from I guess cinematography standpoint, I enjoyed when we see the shot of the northern lights. Like those are quite beautiful to watch. I think I might have attended a northern light show myself when I was younger, but it's different compared to when you actually are standing like in a, I guess, a rural area and you see that unfold in front of your eyes. It looks mesmerizing. And lastly, I enjoyed the concert at the end because you see clearly Omar is in a better place as he's playing his music in front of a crowd. And of course, it cuts with the footage of Omar in Syria doing the same thing. So that was a cool way, I guess, to wrap up his arc of the movie. So yeah, those are pretty much my highlights of this movie. And in terms of lowlights, I don't have a lot, but I had there were some notable ones. So I think one of my main critiques of the movie is the pacing. For me, it kind of was a bit slow at times, particularly when it comes to the later half. I just wish that was tightened up a bit more. Another low light I would say is when Omar is performing his concert towards the end. All of a sudden, it cuts to instrumental music, which in a way frustrated me because I would have loved to heard his whole performance. So I felt maybe they could have intercut his concert with Omar maybe heading back to his place in Scotland. That could have worked for me, but yeah, I didn't really enjoy that choice, that editing choice, I suppose. And lastly, I just wondered with the cultural awareness classes, were they necessary? Like, were they mandatory to attend? Because it seemed clear that people there are just not interested in participating in these classes because everyone, I guess, is competent with English and basically knows like the rules of society and all that stuff. So I just wish it was clear on the purpose of those classes because if they're integral in terms of obtaining asylum status, it could have been mentioned briefly. If not, I don't know. I guess it is what it is, but I just wish the reasoning was mentioned. So let's get on to trivia. So here are a few fun facts that I was able to find on IMDb. So given the difficult subject matter of refugees, Ben Sharrock was quite surprised in talking to people who had fled their home countries that many of them took comfort in humor. That is why he deliberately incorporated a lot of humor into his screenplay. I say that's a wise choice because I just wonder though, had it been a more serious approach, it probably would have been too bleak or too dark for some audience members. So another fun fact: Ben Sharrock wrote the screenplay while staying on Oist, if I'm saying that right. He'd never heard of the place before, but a quick look on Google Maps showed him how remote it was. He found the experience to be really creatively liberating, though the lack of Wi-Fi on the islands was the issue. So yeah, I say that probably works for this. It worked to his advantage because I think for some writers out there, they probably need to be in a similar environment of I guess the settings that they're working on to really get into that mindset or getting to that flow, I suppose, to be, I guess, creatively liberating. While others, I guess, they don't need those stuff. But I guess for Ben Sharrock, it really worked in his favor. And lastly, the film was originally supposed to premiere at the Cannes Film Festival, but that got canceled because of the pandemic. All right. Should this movie be rediscovered? And I say absolutely yes, because it's refreshing to see a film that deals with a serious topic, with this case, immigration and refugee status, essentially told like in a lighter tone without going too dark. That will probably tune out some audience members. And I thought like everyone did a great job with the movie. I really liked with the 4x3 format. It really worked in this instance than just being there as a stylistic choice only. There we have it. There's Limbo. Please check it out wherever it is available to you in your local area. So that pretty much concludes this episode of the podcast. So you can find me on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and Linktree at Nomfanelo. You can find the podcast on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and Linktree at RD Movies Pod. If you're listening on Spotify, you could answer the feature question, the poll, and rate the podcast. On Apple Podcasts, you can leave a review and rate the podcast. Those will really help with the algorithm. You can submit questions, comments, and suggestions by email, which is rediscoveredmovies@gmail.com, or you can send a short voice message on Spotify for podcasters at RD Movies Pod to be featured on the after show, which will air after the season finale. So after this episode on the podcast platforms, that's an audio format only. So if you're watching this on YouTube, you'll have to go to the show's page on Spotify for podcasters to listen to that episode on your preferred platform that's available to you, that's outside of YouTube. So thank you guys so much for tuning to this episode and also for tuning into this season of the podcast. And I'll catch you on the next one.